Hello, I'm Gabriel Malaguti, and I'll be now presenting my senior thesis that regards multilateral development banks as governance mechanisms for common pool goods or common pool resources. My advisor was Professor Maria Silvia Sais. Now, beginning. Well, the main theoretical inspirations of this thesis are Professor Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize laureate, well, basically, the core of my research goes to her Nobel Prize winning work, which she talks about how to govern common pool resources or how to govern commons. So basically, what I'm trying to do here is using her theory in new institutional economics with what Professor Robert Calhoun presents in political sciences as what he calls international regimes, what he calls complex interdependence within multilateral cooperation. What he studies is basically how countries can cooperate within international institutions in order to achieve peace and prosperity as a mutual agreement amongst them. So basically, those are the two cores, the two pillars of my research. So basically, going to the title now. What are multilateral development banks? So those banks are basically banks, obviously, but they are all crafted by countries, by many countries. Sometimes, like for example, the World Bank, there are 180 plus banks that have shares, have parts on those institutions. So they are basically places where countries put their monies, they create those banks that hold a lot of international currency and make loans for countries that are in need and that are members of it. So they create this common pool to manage together. So what are common pool goods? So basically, common pool goods in the new institutional economics theory are goods that have some specific characteristics. Normally, they are used in the environmental perspectives on economics, but basically they are goods that have rivalry between them. They have excludability. They have a finite amount of resources, although they have open access and are in large supply. So basically, what I am addressing in this, my premise on this issue is that international currency, most specifically the dollar and the euro, work as a common pool resource for countries. So basically what I'm doing here now, my hypothesis is that those banks operate because those currencies are common pool goods. Those banks work as common pool mechanisms for governing those assets, those goods. So now, the structure and the methodology of it. So my first chapter talks about the theoretical framework and how to relate those two theories that I'm operating here. So the new neoliberal institutionalism of Robert Calhoun and the new institutional economics of Elinor Ostrom, and how I use the rational, and how they argue against the rational choice dilemmas, like the tragedy of the commons, which happens as a hypothesis in common pool resources scenarios, and also and how the rational choice and the rational choice cooperation model also does not work. So both those authors address those questions. The second chapter of my work has to do with how the international financial system was established ever since 1944 in the Bretton Woods system and how it has developed, how the crisis changed it, and how the emerging countries are now operating within it. And lastly, in my third chapter, I present the quantitative part of my essay. What are the results? What happened? What we could find out by looking at the numbers. So basically what I did was just sum up a lot of databases, the database of the projects of 21 of those banks, and take those numbers and analyze how the scenario is going on. So basically what I have here now is that the results. In those banks, what we have is that the G7 countries are the net donors of the system, which means that they put a lot of more money that they take from the system, while emerging countries are the countries that take the largest amount of resources from this pool. However, the poor countries, in terms of net perspective, are the ones that are taking more money. So, for example, you can see here the example of Palestine and Nepal, which take a lot of money from those resources. And there are a lot of other things that were found out during this exam. For example, the most connected countries are within the system are the European ones and the poor countries from Asia and Africa. We saw that some regional potencies like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iran, although they are developing countries or they are emerging countries, because they are regional banks, they are net providers to the system. So there are a lot of things that were found out throughout this study. The data is at the screen. And finally, as we compare those how MDBs are set to the 8 principles of Elinor Ostrom, we could find that those institutions do account for 6 of them very well, as 2 of them are still a work in progress. So many of those banks have some issues regarding monitoring, the monitoring system of them that Elinor Ostrom says that is very important for developing a common pool resource governance. And the rule-making process is also an issue, as because rich countries finance the system, they are also the countries that, in a way, have the most power in decision-making. So it's not polycentric. So those are the perspectives that we have found out on my S. Thank you.